Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I'm your host, the American Haunt Historian, Alan Searcy. I want to thank everyone who checked out the last show about the South Nashville Frankenstein. Galvanism, it's really so fascinating, but over the years it's been forgotten about. People really did try to revive dead bodies, Frankenstein style, back in the 1800s. So today, I'm going to talk about something else that was huge way back then. But mostly it's become obsolete. It's spiritualism. Spiritualism was huge in the 19th century, and a lot of people made a fortune off of gullible folks who believed that people were mystics and mediums, and they actually had the ability to summon ghosts on command. Well, one of my favorite stories from that era is about Mabel Jackman in the House of Seven Bathrooms. I wrote about her extensively in my book, Ghost Stories and Graveyard Tales, Chicago. I recommend that you check out that book after this episode. Anyway, Chicago was a huge city in the late 1800s, and it was a hub for spiritualism where broken people came to find answers. This is where Dr. Mabel Jackman comes into the picture. In the late 1890s, Mabel began holding seances in her boarding house on North Clark Street. For a fee, she would summon the spirits of deceased loved ones or cure ailments or diseases. She could even look into the future and give you financial advice. Dr. Jackman developed quite a following, and by 1902, she was allowing boarders to live with her so she could tend to them every day. So Mabel's followers, they called her the Shepherdess of Paradise. And one man who sought out Dr. Jackman for advice was another doctor, Dr. Alfred J. Cole. He came to her at least once a week for advice. One night during a seance, he was sitting in her boarding house when two other men, Frank Edwards and George White, came and sat down beside him. As Mabel was summoning the spirits, Frank and George leaned over and asked Dr. Cole if he heard the spirits talking. Dr. Cole humbly admitted that he wasn't in tune with the spirit realm like Dr. Jackman, and implored them to share with what they were saying. The two men informed Dr. Cole that the spirits were telling them that the three of them should go into business together. Now, after the seance, Frank and George invited Dr. Cole to a nearby tavern to talk. Dr. Cole was invited to invest in a listening device that would be able to tap into secure telephone lines and hear people talking at a racetrack. By hearing phone calls from people in the know at the track, they could, in theory, place smarter bets at the track and possibly make a fortune. Well, Dr. Cole, he was a smart guy, so he wasn't quite sure. He's weighing the pros and cons. So what does he do? He goes back and he asks Mabel Jackman what she thought. Well, Mabel told the doctor that Frank Edwards and George White were gifted spiritualists, and that if they proposed something, it was because the spirits were prodding them to go into business with him. So Dr. Cole, upon the advice, he gave Frank and George $1,000, and that equates to $35,000 in today's money. Frank and George quickly hired an engineer and started to build their wiretapping device. Then something strange happened. Frank and George disappeared for a few weeks. Dr. Cole happened to run into Frank on the street a few weeks later, and he asked what was going on with the device. Frank and George, they got back with Dr. Cole, and they told him, after 2 months, that there was a problem. The wiretapping device had been discovered by police, so Frank and George took it to St. Louis to hide it and keep it from being confiscated. So this appeased Dr. Cole for a while. But a month or so later, he approached his partners again, but this time he was given good and bad news. The device worked flawlessly, but a fire burned the warehouse in St. Louis, and their wiretapping machine was destroyed. But Dr. Cole was still hopeful, and he was encouraged that the machine worked. So he gave Frank and George another $2,000 to build a new device. But he insisted that his partners make it fireproof. Frank and George readily agreed. So after a few weeks, Frank and George informed Dr. Cole that the device was operational, and they were actually using it to listen in to conversations at the racetrack. Dr. Cole's partners invited him to a room on 13th Street, Indiana Avenue, and let him listen in to people talking about ailing horses at the racetrack that were going to participate in that afternoon's race. Assured that he had inside information, Dr. Cole went to the track and placed $2,000 in bets on races that he thought sick horses were competing in. It's going to be a big surprise to everybody, but he lost all his money. Dr. Cole was mad, but he was encouraged that the device seemed to work. So when Frank and George came to him a few weeks later and asked for an investment to build a machine to listen in on phone lines that stockbrokers used, Dr. Cole was interested. So he went and met with Dr. Mabel Jackman again, and he gave them $3,000. That's over $100,000 in today's money. After a few weeks, Dr. Cole went to Frank and George asking where the new device was. Each time he was given an excuse as to why there were issues. Finally, Dr. Cole realized he was being duped, and he went to the police. He told them that not only was he conned by Frank and George, but that he had been hypnotized by Dr. Mabel Jackman, and she convinced him to give them the money. Well, Frank Edwards and George White, along with Dr. Mabel Jackman, they were arrested and charged with conspiracy. Well, Dr. Jackman, she was quite outspoken about the incident in the papers and blamed her miraculous healing powers as a reason as to why she was arrested. According to her, she was taking patients away from people like Dr. Cole, and people were turning to her for her divine healing instead of regular doctors like Dr. Cole. Well, Dr. Jackman's attorneys, they got her off, and she quickly moved to a new place on Indiana Avenue called Paradise Home. In her new building, she was able to take in more followers. She also started a printing press and produced pamphlets for followers to pass out in Chicago. Well, two new believers that made their way to Paradise Home were Lydia Simmons and her daughter Nellie. For years, Nellie had been plagued by issues with her joints and had a really hard time walking. Lydia believed that Mabel could cure her. However, in March 1905, a neighbor contacted the police after hearing screams coming from Paradise Home. When they arrived, they found the place locked up tight, and they decided to leave. Well, that's when Mabel's husband, Edward, came home. He begrudgingly allowed the officers to come inside and investigate. When they found Nellie, her hair had all fallen out, and she resembled a skeleton. She was near death, but when the police tried to take her from the home, she insisted that Mabel was healing her. Lydia Simmons came rushing into the room and refused to let her daughter be removed from Mabel's care. Well, after consulting with a judge, the police figured out that they couldn't remove Nellie without consent. However, if she was screaming in pain, she could be arrested for disorderly conduct. So officers rented a room next to Paradise Home and waited for Nellie to scream in agony the following night. Within a few hours, they heard Nellie scream, and they rushed in and arrested her and took her straight to the hospital. When she was admitted, Nellie weighed only 56 pounds. Well, the charges against Nellie were dropped, but Mabel was fined by the state for operating an unlicensed hospital. When Nellie was ready to leave the hospital, her mother insisted they go back to Paradise Home and be treated by Dr. Jackman. But things got worse for Mabel. A lady being treated at Paradise Home, she died, and it got in the papers. Strangely, after that, Mabel and her husband went missing. But fortunately for her, she had received a vision that she needed to go to Nevada to look at land where she could start a new town called Paradise. Well, that didn't pan out. By 1910, Mabel returned to Chicago and was back to holding seances and healing her followers. Many of her old followers returned. Even Dr. Cole, the man who claimed she'd hypnotized him, was back under her care. Nevertheless, within 6 months, he was at the police station claiming that Mabel had swindled him out of $7,500. Go figure. Well, a few years later, Mabel and her husband divorced. Mabel told reporters that her husband was abusive, but Edward maintained she was trying to have him thrown into an institution so she could have all his money. Well, in 1914, Mabel fell in love with one of her followers, conveniently. A 79-year-old widower, Dr. Baron Callan, who just happened to be one of the richest men in Chicago. Mabel convinced him that the spirits told her they were meant to be married. Mabel's new fiancé moved her into his opulent mansion that was known in Chicago as a house of 7 bathrooms. The couple planned to get married in 1917, but sadly, 2 weeks before their big day, he passed away. But, fortunately for Mabel, he left all his possessions to her, including the house of 7 bathrooms. So Mabel began holding seances in the home for a fee, and under the cover of darkness, weird things began to happen in her parlor. She summoned spirits like Julius Caesar and famous authors of her time. She also was able to reach over into another realm and bring beloved fictional characters like Tinkerbell into her home. Well, after a while, the law got involved. People were complaining what she was doing. So 2 undercover officers went in with a reporter into a seance one night. So the reporter posed as a grieving mother who had just lost an infant. And picking up on cues from the reporter, Mabel was able to summon the child's spirit in the dark room. But the next day, the local paper published an expose and called out Mabel's chicanery. Despite the bad press, Mabel kept holding seances in her home. One night, more officers came to the house of 7 bathrooms, ready to shut her down for good. During the seance, she summoned a white figure in the dark parlor. But in the middle of the seance, one of the officers jumped up and grabbed it. A fight ensued, and when the lights were turned on, Charles Marrow, a 25-year-old actor, was arrested for fighting with a police officer. That night, they seized white robes, flowers, a trumpet, and other items Mabel was using to deceive her guest. Mabel was arrested and charged with obtaining money under false pretenses. Like before, she denied the charges and blamed Charles Marrow, saying he was conspiring to make her look bad in the eyes of her followers. So, on the stand, Charles explained how Mabel was able to summon spirits and told the jury how she used phosphorus to make herself glow in the dark and use a pulley system to move things around and make them levitate. Even though her assistant flipped on her and helped the prosecutor, Mabel was acquitted and went right back to hosting seances in the house of 7 bathrooms. Well, despite the acquittal, Mabel stewed on the legal proceedings and became obsessed with getting even with Charles. In fact, she convinced her new assistant, Warren Stevens, to shoot him. Fortunately for Charles, the police spotted Warren peering into the window of Charles's house one night. Warren was arrested. Naturally, he spilled his guts and told the officers that Mabel had blackmailed him into trying to kill her former assistant. Like previous times, Mabel's high-priced attorneys got her off. But the following year, her health began to decline, and Mabel was sent to Dunning Asylum. She only stayed there for a few days before she was found dead in her room. So the story of Mabel Jackman and the House of 7 Bathrooms, it's a crazy, crazy story. But to me, the funniest thing of all, the House of 7 Bathrooms, it really only had 5. I don't know why, but that just tickles me. So if you're going to be in St. Louis this week, I'll be at Transworld Halloween, the biggest Halloween convention in the world. Come by my booth, the Ghost Stories and Graveyard Tales booth. I'll be 2508. Come say hello, grab a book or two. So if you want to read more about the crazy tales in Chicago, check out my book, Ghost Stories and Graveyard Tales Chicago. You can find my Southern Ghost Story books at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. If Barnes & Noble doesn't have it, ask the manager. They can order it for you. The books are also available on Kindle and are actually free to read if you have Kindle Unlimited. Be sure to subscribe and leave a comment and review. Follow Southern Ghost Stories on Facebook or YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at ATO Allen. You can send me questions, and I'll try to answer them on the upcoming shows. So please check back the next time for the Corn House in Franklin, Tennessee.